witnessed the arrival of that video on the public domain, and in the space of 2 days, it disappeared from the public domain because housing activists and anyone involved in sort of conversation about the place of our artists in London felt like, wait a minute, this guy is too close to the bone. This is too real. This is really hurt. These guys are really saying, for once, what they really mean. So Tim, lovely Tim, with his kind of like collar undone, suddenly in a relaxed position, talking to the world investors about London, revealed unwillingly the truth behind transactions that are basically at the heart of what our place is in this sort of economic property situation. It was cut off. 2 days later it disappeared, but it became part of this strange moments in 2014 when we're talking about the post-Olympics, sort of financial crisis almost seemingly resolved, a new bubble, and the knowledge that something was happening in the property market that was not quite right. It's almost like this zombie walking towards another horizon, but not quite so sure of itself. Which is why Tim, in his strange kind of enthusiasm, reveals the truth and does what in cultural sort of terms very often we call doing a ratna. Has anyone heard of that term before? What this means, doing a ratna? So in the 90s, and this is really interesting because it goes back to high street markets. In the 90s, Gerald Ratner was the owner of a very successful low-cost jewelry stores all over the UK. And it was like one of those kind of things that now you have accessorized in all kind of places about, sort of like, how do you make this shit so cheap? It's like going to a market on the seafront in some Costa del Sol village where suddenly this stuff is so cheap, and you wonder why. So Gerald Ratner at some point becomes so big that they interview him, and he kind of speaks so candidly about why his chain is successful that he makes a faux pas. Basically, he admits that his stuff is cheap shit that should never be priced even at that level that it is, and that's why it is so successful. Right, hello, capitalism suddenly revealed the Wizard of Oz behind the curtain speaks and tells the truth. And wow, everyone say, yeah, right, almost like we always know this, but it's almost like that sense of like, suddenly the revelation of something that you always felt and you always knew, and it's there. So Gerald Ratner gave this name to this idea of a businessman that declared their own kind of game so clearly and so openly and so candidly that it destroys the game. So this chain that Ratner was responsible for, of course, collapses, and that particular revelation, because everyone feels duped, right? Suddenly they realize they have been duped, and so on and so on. So what Tim is doing here, and I love that character in a strange kind of way, he tells it like it is. And that's why the video is taken down. But why do we have that gap between telling it like it is and the video being taken down, and what it is in this game that we call the market, in which these values are certain and then they're taken down, then they disappear, that we cannot take in its face value? What is it that Tim says that is, makes us feel kind of vomiting in a certain kind of way? Is the characterization of the place of the artist in the game, which is, when the artists come in, that's what you want to invest. So that's Lewisham, right? 2014. And you can see how those mechanisms were already in place to make Catford 2022. But actually, the story of Catford 2022 doesn't begin now. We're just at a particular point in time of a long trajectory. And if you look at what Team Catford, the regeneration agency in charge of Catford, is planning, they've been going on for quite some time. It's like 2017, 2018. And then the pandemic has only in one way accelerated, in one way slowed down the same mechanism. So I just wanted to start with that, because there's a really good point in this timeline of what these relationships between artists wanting to take over empty spaces and those who are the property owners or the property developers of the area giving in or resisting, or even at the opposite end of the spectrum of the slider between friendship and fuck off, the kind of things that you can think of. Now we're at the far furthest end of friendship. Please do. Not only we have middle sort of managers that gets you the gig. Even you don't even have to worry about how to get the gig. All you have to do is to apply to get the gig, which is what you did, right? And I thought this was interesting because, you know, if there's only one thing that I can say to you that might be sort of different from what you already know, and I'm really interested to hear what you know, is that I'm old enough to have seen this relationship changing between a situation where you were to sort of force your way in, tactically organize something, manage your conversation in a certain way that it made it appealing to those who didn't want to give you what you wanted, to now actually having even more the situation in which you're actually invited to do this. The agency that you are, sort of that is your middleman, let's say you're a state agent, right, is a Art Council of England sponsored estate agent that manages properties and connects landlords with people like you. How's that for a sense that we have changed the term of this conversation to an extent that rather than you having to knock the door and convince someone that you're worthy their attention, they come and look for you. Not only, there's selections and there's 200 of you and you are the winners of this prize. That is incredible in itself. And perhaps that makes us think of what does it mean to be wanted? How does it change the relationship if you're suddenly a prized property? You are an asset that is not anymore the embarrassing asking job to say we would like this actually, if you don't mind, thank you, but please, but we'll pay the business rates, no worries, and all of that. And suddenly it's like smoothly arranged for you. What does that mean in a sense of a general sense of purpose or driving this relationship to other places? So, the place that I wanted to show you, where this is happening, also to a certain extent, is the place where I live. Anyone from Tottenham around here? Does anyone know Tottenham? Yeah? So, Tottenham is basically N15. N15, and it's one of the most heavily kind of regenerated places at the moment. It's like something that is really... I can do this. I'm going to be behind the curtain at the moment. Okay, so what is happening here? These are the hoardings that are fencing the site that is built at the moment. It's not existing yet. So the classic hoarding have usually renderings of places that do not yet exist as a way of giving us a look into the future of a social life of this place. So constructed in all those kind of classic tableaus of white people doing white things for the right reason and all in the right situation, right? But here it goes further. You have artists directly invested into the face of the development. So these are the heroes of the locality that are directly invested into the value of the development itself. So it's like it's purchasing power. So if you felt sick after Tim told you that when the artists come in, you want to come in, this is almost like another degree of that same sickness. But once we go over the vomit stage, I hope you stay here on cue, and we start to think of what to do with the post-vomit stage. Once we know that the game is really blatantly obvious, and we sober up, how do we conform, or how do we understand our position? What is our bargaining value? What is our bargaining position once we understand that we are actually wanted? And how there is a history of that being wanted that goes from, not sure, you guys are a pain in the ass, yes please. Right? There's a slider that goes in between, and that slider has moved definitely towards a yes please, rather than the not sure about it, you're a pain in the ass. Right? So what does it mean? Have we become less of a pain in the ass? Is our work less damaging to, or less incisively critical to an extent that it has some potential danger to those who are actually showing it? Or does it mean that we got to a point where capitalism has found a way to absorb perfectly its own critique, sustain it, and make it even palatable, a palatable value for purchasing flats that have nothing to do with the critical system that we are trying to demolish or attack, or just to gently prod, just to say maybe there's other things in life. Can I just have one more slide? It's the same thing. So yeah, again, paint, draw, the hero, so that the studio providers, the artists, whatever. Now, I'm really not in the business of vilifying the artist involved. That's not what I'm about. That's never the point. The point is perhaps to ask whether the artists have got some payback out of it, or whether they simply agreed to have their image used because they thought it probably was a two-way vis-a-vis kind of quid pro quo, win-win situation. I get some publicity and that's fine, right? That's maybe what it is. So these are some of the renderings that you see. Partly are royalty-free classic things, partly... I think this one is really interesting because you can see there's a public art sculpture there that is not even being commissioned yet, or even existing. Actually, in another view of the development, the sculpture is not even there anymore. But you know, I don't know about you, but I'm sure that if someone would actually propose something like that, the first things they will say, what? And health and safety next? You know, whatever, this kind of spikes coming out of the decline. But if the developer wishes it to make it happen, well, they can imagine the artist in their heads doing and wanting this. That's also an interesting thing. We're confronting different imaginary. The imaginary that is manifested by the developer of us is not us. But how do you use the imaginary of the developer of us to make us in a better place to do what we really want to do? I'm not trying to say be conniving or be manipulative, but I'm just trying to say, if your position at this particular point in a window of opportunity where you are wanted, try to understand what it is that I want and try to work with that in one way or another to get what you want, which might be nothing to do, very likely, usually, is nothing to do with what they think, right? So, the slide just before was the guy that was talking, right? So we've seen that Mr. Tim in Rise 2014, Deptford. And we know very well, this is where you are, guys. Now this was before the MFA moved to Deptford, right? So maybe, which was when? In 2018, wasn't it?
2016.
2016?
No, the end of 2016.
16?
Like the 2016-17 academic
cohort
year. Yeah.
was like, okay. So, you know, timeline, you can see how a certain momentum. Perhaps it's just a question of there's something in London that is just a virus that is unstoppable, and it's not the pandemic. It's not COVID, it's property. It's just, there is one game in town, and that is property. That's how it is. The next slides are just, this is basically, spoiler alert, I haven't got much more clever to say than what I've said in this introduction, big kind of like positioning thing. I would like this to be our conversation, sort of one potential conversation, what to make of this attraction. And just give you a brief idea that this relationship that changes started, for instance, when does the high street suddenly think, uh-oh, I need something else, right? This is one moment. The moment where you need something else is post-financial crisis, 2008, 2009. Some artists already positioned in that kind of way start to talk about, well, you guys obviously are in deep shit, but we can help you. Maybe we can give you something to put in those shops. And Dan Thompson, in 2008, with his partner, started the Empty Shops Network. So, the Empty Shop Networks, however, is nothing like the middle management of Haifa studios that you have now. They never got money from Arts Council. They were basically a spatial kind of occupation agency that tries to be a kind of a facilitator and provided a meanwhile contract template for artists to go out and do it themselves. It didn't tell them what to do, it didn't tell them how to do it, but it provided the difficult part that usually artists are finding difficult to do, the legal part, right? The contract. How to approach someone and say, look, don't worry, this is our contract, this is our responsibilities, this is what we do. So that was like a long time ago. And then next, yeah, I think you might be fine the whole thing, yeah? No. Just up there, yeah, oh, no. Oh, I think you're using yeah. If you do Apple, Control 0, it brings it back to its own magnification, natural.
This is the normal one.
Yeah, the next slide.
Yeah, next slide, yeah.
Thank you.
So, meanwhile foundation, right? So, you can see that this idea of the meanwhile contract, that was the standard idea of how artists approach landlords, right? Property owners, with this idea of meanwhile contract, then becomes a foundation. Why? Because the idea of the meanwhile, right, or the temporary occupation of spaces by artists, was essentially a way to divert the normal way in which an artist could actually exhibit and therefore bypass the local art institutions, right? Do something that maybe was a bit disruptive, or maybe as not just disruptive in a way that you want to just, be narky in some strange kind of way. You just want to do your own thing without having to pay homage to the local person that has always been the fixer of everything that happens in that area, right? Whether it's a small village, a London area, or whatever. So, a pilot scheme, matching landlords, struggling to find tenants for the empty property, for the community groups. So, here's one main distinction. Haifa just does artists. Meanwhile Spaces, for a long time, and the Empty Shop Networks, was never just artists. Because one question you should ask is, why do artists have a privilege over other local groups in order to reach that space? What is it that makes them particularly special, maybe, or top of the list in order to have those spaces? That's something that Haifa seems to have already sort of concluded that is the way it is. We have privilege over other things. But then I can see that what is interesting is that some artists, obviously here in the show, have already invited others to come in, right? That's a good side of what artists do. Very often, as artists set foot into a place, they invite others who are not artists to be part of it. And that is the interesting part. Next thing. So this is another major initiative called Platform Town Center Property Innovation Program, started in last year, and it was like an experimental community entrepreneurship kind of ways to say, okay, let's see what else we can do with high street places or with kind of a retail, considering that the pandemic has really run us to a level where we have no solutions inside. So of course, Peacocks is here, and you have this space because of that, because being one of the classic victim of that particular situation. And this is what kind of like the platform sort of like High Street Task Force. Now, the High Street Task Force was started in 2012, sort of post financial crisis and during the Olympics, to try already to sort something out in the high street management. Because where we are now has just made things go much further, but not really changed a trend that was already clearly apparent. So where is this desperate need for artists suddenly, give me something in my store, right? This movement was already in process, right? So next, I think it's basically, that's it. So we're on a mission to regenerate high streets to art. I think that kind of says it very clearly that first there is a mention of regeneration. Hey man, you right? Do you want to? That there is a specific mention of regeneration, which has never been in any of the other agencies. Similar agencies, they go towards broader community, right, engagement. So this one is regenerate high streets through art. That's quite a bold kind of claim. Now, I don't know if you feel like you're suddenly change seats, and if you look at how Haifa sort of like packaged your action, or their action all throughout, you're regenerators. You suddenly have become regenerators, like almost like that strange kind of, you almost have absorbed that strange view from outside of 2014, when the artists come in, then, but of course, I think that the interesting things of where we are now is that the words of 2014 in the context of 2022 mean very little, to an extent. So, however, you might have a sense of rejection of that characterizations of you being the regenerator, and here still having that claim being regenerator. It seems to me that what these historical examples are giving you is that there is a layer of, well, you can call it discourse, urban discourse, but you can also call it bullshit. It depends how you want to identify it with it. But it's almost like bullshit that creates something real, right? So that level of urban discourse stroke bullshit that talks about the artist's function in a certain kind of way is the discourse that allows you to be in here now. Is what legitimizes the fact that you are actually potentially the ruler of this space for this month, right? So I just wanted to give this sort of little quick sweep through from a particular point in time when you almost like the artistic community of London went, what? Oh my God, that's not us. You can't say that that's what we do. When the developers, of course, always realize that, right? For it to come out in such bold sort of way, and now it's almost like, if I was a cheesy kind of regeneration manager, and I wanted a tagline for Catford, I would say the Catford is out of the bag, and you can't put it back in. Right? That's pretty cheesy, right? I told you that it was going to be cheesy. It's kind of, but what does that mean? That everything that started as this kind of coy game positioning, I exploit you, you exploit me, but we cannot say, is now blatant, obvious. It's almost so obvious that these acts of exploitations have acquired a different kind of violence or a different kind of mutual exploitation to an extent that changes the terms of the conversation. Now, these are not irreversible things, right? Then we might reverse back to a point where, as soon as you bet that as soon as if ever the high street had to go back to a place, a different place, they will not want us there anymore. Because of course, you can imagine a high street that has every high level of occupancy, why would it need us in the first place? So that's basically the kind of, I just wanted to sort of reassess this moment and congratulate you for being here and take all this strange kind of to and fro, past and present things in, and maybe make you think that, maybe, I don't know, maybe next time I don't need a hi-fi to do the things that I want to do, that kind of thing. That's it.
Or maybe not.
Or maybe not. Or maybe
Wait.
not. Maybe the climate will be so hard that there will be plenty of other Haifas. They're all fighting for the same stores. And then there'll be 2,000 artists applying for one store.
200 is already crazy.
Yeah, whatever. Just crazy anyway.
Can I be a pain in the ass? Does anyone
Yeah.
know if the tap upstairs has running water?
Yeah.
I don't
Yeah.
even care if it's poison. I just,
No, it's not. Yeah.
I'm just really thirsty and if I talk.
Thank you.
I'll
On the
I'll
slide.
go
We can prepare the slides over an hour.
Yes, sure. Let's do it.
fill that up. Sorry, thank you.
What are your slides in? Is that PowerPoint?
Yeah, I already put on my.
Oh.
Has anyone drank the water? It's not like...
I haven't, I'm still alive, so I
Okay,
guess.
it's fine. I feel like when you have an old disused building, people always tell you that the water is like poison. But I don't know if it actually is.
There's one.
Yeah,
Laura,
it's a gamble.
Laura, which one is it? Is that one, Futurama?
The top, the middle one.
That one.
Futures After. So I have excessive notes, which I shall slightly read from, so I apologise for that, but my brain can't retain any information.
Okay. Marvelous. Okay.
I'm just, tell me if you can't hear me, I just have to set out of the way that light. I guess I'm going to introduce a project that I've just kind of launched, which has raised a lot of issues and problems and questions in my mind, as Alberto has been talking about. And I guess it's a bit of a counterpoint in that I've accessed an empty retail unit, not through using one of these middlemen agencies, but that actually has come with so many stresses and problems that I'm kind of seeing slightly the appeal, even though I don't think the middleman system is actually a structure is like a good thing. So the project's called Museum of Modern Shopping, basically, I don't know, can you go on to the next slide actually? It just came out of being bored in lockdown and starting a stupid Instagram account sharing like screenshots of like the most ridiculous sponsored ads I saw, because I was just, I don't know, it seemed to go like wish.com crazy at that time, and it just, it was like spiraling out of control in my feed. And then loads of people started sending me images of all the bizarre adverts and stuff. And then at some point I kind of thought like, oh, maybe I'll just get a physical space and kind of open the Museum of Modern Shopping in real life after after lockdown ended, and I just wanted to be in a physical space and amongst people and things like that. I just want to mention that when I started this Instagram account, I got a message from, thank you for the water, from someone else who runs a similar Instagram account that maybe people follow. And he basically accused me of stealing his idea and trying to steal his audience. And I was like, I have literally never seen your Instagram account in my life. And these are images that a large proportion of the world are encountering on like a daily basis. So I thought it was interesting, the idea that this person could claim, or thought that they could claim ownership over these images that they'd appropriated from these companies. And that got me thinking a lot about, it felt a bit like if someone was trying to claim the genre of latte art on Instagram or something, and I started thinking that it kind of indicated something to me about like, this was an artist who ran the other account, and it was like they kind of thought that there was this kind of special status that the artist had that maybe made them somehow superior to an influencer or to like a general user of social media who, there's trends, everyone's churning out a similar content. But for some reason, this artist thought I was stealing their content, even though it was just screenshots of stuff that loads of people encounter. So I thought that was interesting, and I think I've been thinking a lot about influencer culture and how it relates to being an artist and how it's very much built on like aspirational labor and the idea if you just keep churning the content out that eventually you will reap the rewards, some kind of financial stability, which I'd say largely doesn't happen. It happens for some people. But yeah, it seemed like a kind of interesting contrast, the physical space and, trying to use those opportunities of space, and then also the social media space, which is, accessible to anyone with a smartphone and the internet. And that idea of trying to like capitalize on it and, you know, extract what you can, produce content, find a space for it. So this is the space that I've ended up moving the Museum of Modern Shopping into. It's called Romford Shopping Hall. It's in Romford, which is in East London, not that far from where I live. And basically, I had a meeting with the manager, and it's this, well, first of all, it's a 95-year-old shopping centre. It's quite a rarity in that it's purely occupied by like small, independent, largely family-run businesses. Many of them have been there for decades. Very different to most shopping centres that are full of like Primark and all the big international chains. So it felt like a nice place to be, in that it felt a bit like a museum itself already, that was really struggling to survive.
I'm sorry, where did you say it was?
Romford.
Okay.
It's east, well, it's like almost in Essex. It used to be classed as Essex, so it's quite far out.
Okay.
But they've got like 4 shopping centres, a market. It's kind of suburban, but the entire centre is very much focused on shopping, but like so many shops are sitting empty. So this is the space that, the space that the museum's in. But the manager said to me, like, retail's dead, everyone's shopping online, I can't go on trying to get shops in here, so I'm focusing on services. So they have like 4 cafes in there, like an eyelash bar, whatever that is, a tattoo parlour, a dentures clinic. Yeah, the amazing eyelash bar that has a very nice installation, and it's very popular. There's t-shirt printers, and it already felt a lot like a kind of social space. Like it's mostly in the week, seems to be full of elderly people having coffee and lunch, and there's a children's play centre, like soft play centre, so a lot of children at the weekends especially, and they already run like a programme of workshops for kids and things like that, so that kind of gives it a bit of life, which I thought, and they were into the idea of a museum. But I should point out that I individually sought out Arts Council funding for this, which was frankly an absolute nightmare. And then the original space, when I did the application, that I had kind of, been granted use of, ended up getting rented out to like a shop. So of course, I'm booted out of that shopping centre. So it was a bit of like a panicked scramble, like to get a space, and it's a very like stressful, precarious way of working. And in hindsight, I think I was just like mad in lockdown, like applying for things, thinking things were going to happen that were actually very difficult to orchestrate. But the space is there, and I've got a programme of like exhibitions throughout until October. They basically all will be looking at different issues relating to loosely like the architecture of shopping. The one at the moment kind of like goes to the starting point of wish.com and influencer culture and what affects like the way we consume online. I think one of my favourite things in it, I commissioned a series of videos from nano influencers who are, just like basically anyone on Instagram. I think the definition is you have between like 1 and 10,000 followers. So I paid them a small amount and just got them to make videos promoting the museum. So these are in the museum. The first show is very much, there's not really any artists, it's like objects and things I've kind of curated, I guess you would say, though I would not ever call myself a curator.
I hope you're going to show some illustrations. Are they?
No, I don't.
No?
There's no video,
Well,
but they're on
if we get on
Instagram.
the website, they're there, right?
They're on Instagram.
Yeah, they're on Instagram.
So also I'm going to be running workshops there every month, and kind of working with the shopping centre manager to try and get like an audience and bring people in for that. I'm also there's like a little bit outside the space, I'm going to set up like a swap shop so people can bring old clothes and like take away a new thing. And I don't know, I kind of want it to be quite fluid and dynamic and just respond to whatever seems to bring people in and get people talking, and I don't know. But it could be a complete failure and no one's interested, which is always the problem. But I don't know. Do you want to go on to the next slide? And the next one? And the next one? Yeah, so one event I did online, there's some events that will be online that are more discussions that are happening online, mostly because of the slightly inconvenient shopping centre opening hours. But I spoke to Ella Harris, who's I guess a geographer, and she wrote this book, Rebranding Precarity. And this, she looks at like different forms of meanwhile space and kind of talks about them as, well, like basically they're a compensatory culture, so they're filling a gap because the actual provision of long-term space for not only artists but like cultural organisations, for small businesses like people who want to run restaurants who end up doing supper clubs in their house or things like that, pop-up restaurants. So do you want to go on to the next one? So for example, the box park kind of model, the shipping container architecture, which apparently, I think it really proliferated after like the crash of 2008. But basically it started out of the fact there's like a surplus of shipping containers that aren't being used, and it's kind of more expensive to ship them back to wherever they came from than just leave them. And because I think after the crisis of 2008, there was like less shipping and trade, and things kind of died down a bit, which is I imagine what's happening right now as well. So they became like a very practical way of creating spaces for these things. But of course it's now become basically an aesthetic, and most of the shipping containers are actually commissioned and built to order. So again, they're being shipped, I guess, they're being shipped empty from whatever country they're being made in. So it's just become this ridiculous like trend, obviously. And I guess that also slightly brings me back to social media. Like I've been wondering, what is it that makes, that turns these things into an aesthetic? I mean, it's a very like common practice. You've got the kind of, you know, the warehouse living and squatting that happens, and then warehouse living becomes trendy, and suddenly people are paying shitloads of money to live in shitty warehouses. And then you've got the property developers. And then Adidas do pop-up events and make this quite amazing giant shoe box. But yeah, then you have the property developers actually making flats to look like warehouses, obviously. But yeah, I don't know. Ella, who I spoke to, she thought that there was this thing where gentrification happens and the middle classes have to move to areas that they maybe previously wouldn't have lived in, and they try to handle like living in a poorer area by like almost like appropriating the aesthetic or kind of making it a bit ironic and kind of using it. And I'm not sure I agree with that, but I guess I don't think I've ever like experienced moving from one area in London to somewhere that was like aesthetically or whatever like drastically different. I've never lived in like a really affluent area, so I'm not sure I really agree with that. But I don't know, I think, yeah, for me, I think Instagram plays quite a big role in these things, you know, the kind of like derelict, not that, but the like derelict urban landscape can become a kind of selfie backdrop, and then it circulates and it becomes this kind of global aesthetic. Can you go back to the other one? And then this is what another geographer, Ollie Mould, talks about, what he calls squat washing, which is very similar to art washing, which is, I guess, essentially what we're talking about. But squat washing is adopting or appropriating the aesthetic of squats, basically, or like even protest culture, kind of like grassroots DIY culture. And this was a garden that was in Shoreditch.
Yeah, the nomadic.
Nomadic
garden.
community garden it was called.
Yeah. Which obviously now is a building site of the
it
was always meant to be there.
It was like a community garden, and then London Newcastle, who are a huge developer, who also did Balfron Tower.
Yeah.
They bought the land, and then they, you know, granted the people permission to keep doing what they were doing. I'm not sure how much it changed the actual activities of what was happening there. I guess it became a lot more slick and professional, but it still retained the kind of squat aesthetic. And I did have a video, but I don't think we should watch it because it's a bit long. And basically, the video is, the project shut down, I think, maybe 2018, 19. And there's a video kind of talking about it and what happened. And I mean, the people in the video who were running this community garden, obviously the video is going to depict a very positive story, but they're all very enthusiastic about the fact that London Newcastle granted them the permission to stay there and let them run the project for that long. So I think this is another like tricky point whereby it's like, well, if people do feel that they benefit from the use of these meanwhile spaces, then is it, you know, like, I don't know, there's a line, because ultimately it's just putting property prices up and displacing people. So I don't know, it's like, who's involved in those projects, who's using the space, are they blinded by the opportunity and don't kind of see the long-term implications? I'm saying this as me also being part of this problem, obviously. So yeah, I don't know, it's very complicated and tricky, I guess. Can you go on to the next slide? I don't remember what it is. Oh yeah, and I just wanted to finish with this example that I think is a really interesting project that's also opened pretty recently, and maybe if some of you have heard of it, it's called House of Annetta. It's on Brick Lane, or just off of Brick Lane, and basically it was a woman's house. She died, she left it to this, there's a Swiss trust, what are they called? Can you go on to the next one? The Edith Marion Foundation. Anyway, they kind of work to like take properties out of the real estate market. So the foundation basically, they mostly have like properties in, I think, like Switzerland and Germany, but they fund, buying the building or supporting the activity that's going to happen there. So they also buy up farmland and give it to farmers who are going to instigate kind of like more sustainable farming practices. But yeah, House of Annetta is part of this foundation's activities and is quite a large house actually. They've got lots of spaces that, you can go into the next one, that are going to be used for, it's mostly activities relating to like housing justice, collective assemble architects. I don't know, they've been in residence, so they've been kind of setting it up, which also made me wonder, like, I mean, like, would they invite artists to do something like this? Like, Assemble are an architecture practice, they earn a living from that, they are, there's 17 of them, so they're already a ready-made group who can share the labour. And then I think that's another problem when it comes to artists. It's not just because there's a competitive landscape or whatever that we're all just want to compete with each other, but on a very practical level, it's hard to kind of collectivise because everyone's doing different jobs, very different ways of earning money. I'm like wishing I was doing the Museum of Modern Shopping with other people, but like in lockdown, it was very isolated and just coming up with stupid ideas. And I don't know, I think on a very practical level, it's hard to do projects like this, obviously, especially as artists, because they take so much time, so much planning. And I think probably, an architecture firm of 17 people who earn a living from doing that probably have a bit more of a chance of being invited to do something like that, because it's, just way more feasible and achievable. I don't know, I guess I just wanted to introduce the project and talk a bit around it, and I don't really know what the answer is to any of these kind of problems or questions, and obviously it's kind of like a very obvious thing to say that we need to keep like just having discussions about it and talking about it and figuring out what to do. But I also think like you've got the middleman situation that Alberto was talking about, and then the flip side is like me on my own applying to the Arts Council. It's a complete nightmare. And then trying to get a space and being booted out because someone with money comes along, and then finding another one. And that is fucking stressful as well. Like, I don't know, I'm not sure. I guess the ideal point is neither of those. I guess maybe we can have a more discussion-y.
About this situation.
Do we want to maybe put the light on so that we can see each other as we start any conversation? Because I think maybe that might be helpful. Hey.
Easy.
Great.
Do you want to move in a little bit?
We don't have the flash of the projector.
We
Just,
can
yeah,
start
just come
with that
close.
as well.
And thank you, Laura, thank you for inviting me, by the way, because actually you were called in first. And you called me in. So that's great, thank you. So we didn't have too much of a organized sort of like way of doing this, but we realized that I was coming from maybe kind of a general research viewpoint, you more as a practitioner, the kind of things that you're on experience. But I think the word that really caught me in your presentation is pop-up, because it's probably something that's gone totally out of fashion now, but it was the thing in kind of post-financial crisis.
Yeah, people are usually saying pop-up.
They don't say it no more, right? So, but pop-up was the
I think
thing.
it's assumed that everything's just pop-up.
I know. In fact, actually,
No,
It's like-
nothing is permanent.
Yeah, everything.
Everything is
exactly.
temporary.
I think
Well, it's like we do pop-up jobs.
Yeah,
like
right.
Deliveroo is a fucking pop-up job,
Yeah.
really, isn't it?
I mean, that's the thing. It's almost like it seems to signify a dynamic difference from
Sorry.
temporality that was like there was pop-up was adding value to the fact that you're in a shit precarious situation. It was like the flip side of the shit precarious situation made good, because it's like your pop-up. It's almost like, you know.
Well, I guess I think of it more
Flip.
in association, that word with
Yeah.
like pop-up
Yeah.
fashion boutiques or something.
That's right.
Like it seems quite...
Which in fact, in
Sexy.
Hackney, it became exactly, after the riots, became exactly the kind of things that some of the riots fund, post-riots fund money from the Mayor of London, arrived in Hackney with the idea of the pop-up fashion, which was that sort of like the fashion quarter in Morning Lane, which then was turned into this kind of like rotation of fashion designers, young fashion designers that could be picked up and sort of like exposed to a wider public. So I think that what is really interesting about all this is that the transition of the city into generally this idea of a city as not a place where things happen and you will be reaping the fortunes of what you have invested yourself. So this idea of continuity, permanence, investment in a certain place. The idea is that this pop-up city logic is that nothing will ever be permanent. Mm-hmm. No one and nothing will ever be ongoing, permanent, rooted in a way that we will allow it to happen. So it's almost like the logic of the pop-up and the financial crisis, which was like collapse into itself of a certain structure, created this a kind of sense of loss, complete loss of expectations towards a permanent situation. And that justified social housing being removed or being constantly haunted and hunted down, the creation of spaces that were supposed to be stained for good but never will, our own lives being like sort of grounded in a certain space because you want to but you will not be allowed to. So it's a sense of like a rejection of a temporality. So it's like everyone would like to accept that perhaps that was a fairy tale, a 20th century fairy tale that we cannot sustain anymore in the 21st century. So the box park and all that, right?
I mean, box park's been there a while, so I
particularly,
don't know what...
yeah.
It's not that temporary.
And there's one box park in every
well,
emerging
temporary.
place in
but-
London, right? Croydon.
Yeah, I get it.
Shoreditch.
I know the Shoreditch
Sure,
one.
yeah.
So that's what it's anyway, so yeah, that's what I quite like, this kind of idea that again we have to sort of like internalize the utter uncertainty of the whole environment, the impossibility of permanence, the temporality that will always say you're here one day but don't expect to be here the next.
It's actually, I remember when we moved at Goldsmiths to Lesoko at Deptford, I at one point in the bird's nest or something like met this guy who, this old guy who told me he had like been on the construction team to build the building, and he's like, yeah, it was only meant to last 30 years, and it's been well over 30 years. So even like when they build a building that's supposedly temporary on a longer term scale, it's like, it's cheap, it's shit, it's going to fall apart. You're not meant to still be inhabiting that building, but then of course no one wants to spend money like refurbishing it or whatever, so they're just sitting on it probably until they sell that land to like a big developer, which I'm pretty sure will happen soon. Probably Ballymore, because they're not in Deptford.
Oh, yeah.
But yeah, that's kind of, so even like, even you've got universities having to find these like temporary spaces, and
Indeed.
today I went for a COVID test in Westfield in an empty shop.
There you go.
I mean, it's like
Yeah.
healthcare is now in like an old IKEA.
Yeah, but it won't last, won't last. I'm sure.
But
Which is not necessarily bad.
no, go. If you
No,
have a
I
question.
just wanted to ask quickly on the kind of sense of, but isn't like the sense of perpetual change, isn't it something that essentially is needed for capitalism and everything else? Because stagnation is like the worst thing that can happen, right? So even...
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's really interesting because actually, I think we have anyone who's had any investment in any kind of radical history or kind of anti-capitalist discourse or whatever, you kind of reach very quickly, even if you're young and just arrived on the scene, you reach very quickly a terminal point and say, something's not quite right here, isn't it? We're trying to fight a beast that obviously feeds us. We feed constantly, and if we feed it in a sense that it's capable of being like nature. Capitalism is probably the closest things to nature there is, in a sense that it's become pretty good at using its own waste, using its own human resources, using its own cycles. And as you're saying, we are capable of actually almost marveling at the resilience of these things that we try to kill, but actually is better at surviving than anything else. But in terms of change, right? I don't know if you ever read Octavia Butler novels, sort of like science fiction novels. So Octavia Butler's novels sort of always begin with this idea: God is change, right? And God is change because it's basically enshrining this idea that she's almost trying to reconstruct capitalism as change, as God, but at the same time provide an exit. A lateral exit out of that way of this thing reproducing itself. And what is it? It's actually, it's really interesting. The hero in the parable of the sower is an over-emphatic person. Someone that has the capacity or has the condition of feeling other people's emotions. So when she's, for instance, next to someone, she will feel their pain, she will understand their feelings, and that's why she can become the convener of this new religion that is the center of this novel, right? This new that exists exactly because he embraces the nature of the world as change, as constant change. So it's clear that certainty and permanence were always narrative that were given to us to allow us to subscribe to certain ideals. But they were always, we know very well that they came at a price, and we now would not accept those prices, right? Because of racial, environmental violence, right? So we know very well that we cannot necessarily provide those kind of narratives. We don't want them. We are made many ways to reject them. And on the other hand, we do want humanity beyond those narratives, right? So how to embrace change without necessarily allowing capitalism to be in charge of the change. That is what Octavia Butler also brings us to. And she brings it through the figure of this over-emphatic person that feels the other as a potential solution. So, to an extent, I think that, let's look at this situation, right? So imagine something amazing to your experience as a human being in this impermanent situations that you have just set up. You meet something or someone or something happens in this particular impermanent moment in your ex-Peacock residency that you realize that actually is quite life-changing for you or for the other person or for something that happens. Now, all of this, it's happening within a context that obviously is pure capitalist exploitation, right? You're just here to fill a gap, pay, so someone else pay the business rent so the landlord doesn't have to, right? Now that's on a purely kind of frontal face kind of value. But what happens in this space, obviously, is very different, right? What can happen in this space is very different. And I think that perhaps that sort of over-emphatic emotional investments that you might put into whatever you do can be the vehicle for change, despite the circumstances in which this situation is taking place, which are clearly not arranged according to your own wishes, right? So I think it's perhaps like it's always been, but now more than ever, when there is total uncertainty, right? And we're all trying to work out what the fuck is happening, or what has just happened, right? And how to move forward. Maybe the only things that I'm thinking in the middle of this, and I'm trying to do this job myself, how to make sense of what's going on, is that this kind of acceptance of the total uncertainty and the fact that we don't have a return, a way back to those narratives that will make us feel were making us feel comfortable and permanence and reliable, is exactly the point, that we have to train ourselves to exist in that kind of world, because we invest our human values in different ways. Not through those narratives. Those narratives that we were offered are not the ones where we're going to decide to build a future, right?
Yeah, I have this question about like this kind of physical deteriorization, because when we talk about deteriorization, it's something relatable with digital. But now my question is like, we are in front of something that changed completely the environment and the community. Because if we destroy and change a place and we just put different kind of middle class people in our area that is just a suburbs and blah, 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 what happened? We destroy an identity to
survive.
Yeah, no to survive, but to change with a category. Just the idea of the difference between categories and identities. Identities, it's not good and reliable for shopping and capitalism. Categories, yes, because categories is good for the products. Identities is just something that live outside the capitalism, the area. And in fact, now I'm confused about this idea that, okay, if we open and we continue this try solution to save the landlord, the business with IFA organization and blah, 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 what we really do for the community, so for the identities, for the original identity of that place. My answer now is nothing. Actually, nothing, because we just create more opportunities for the landlord and blah, blah, blah. But also with an occupation, with a squatter action inside a community like this, what we can do really, it's like zero. Because we bring inside a kind of imperialistic art way. Just we are art, we want to change the place. And we can just change the genre.
Can I ask you, what was in your application, right?
Yeah.
The one that was successful, right? Was the title Futures After already part of it? Was that what it was? And in this particular, in the context of the question you just asked, was that something that was part of the application? Was part of the application this question?
I think the market.
No, it was
The idea of market. Something that was.
Yeah, but it wasn't. It was. I think what Alberto is trying to ask is whether the application proposed itself as being critical to gentrification, which it didn't.
Or
it was more to do with rethinking modes of exchange and working with community, and then they also asked what's, why is it important for you as artists? How can this benefit you as artists? And for us, it was the fact that there are lots of international international artists that never had a show in London or never had to an opportunity to participate at this scale. So that's like few things that I remember, but no, we didn't propose it because it's I don't think it has been addressed in the show at all. Like the show focuses on
well,
on
maybe
those
if you
7
did
years.
address it in the application, you would have never got the space, because it sounds like it would have been shooting way over the ambitions of what things like this might be able to do. And I think that I don't know exactly what questions were in the application that you answered to. Maybe that would be interesting. I'd love to see the application of what it's like to apply to IFA studios in whatever, one way or another. But I think it's what is really interesting is that I think that you're entertaining this kind of conversations in kind of the way that you are perhaps overstating the certain kind of ambitions that you might feel that you are settling in this particular context, right? I think that it's really interesting that hyper exists, right? Or that he has made this exist, right?
But I think so. This is just my
Yeah.
feeling is where you probably see more into what Hyper does than they do themselves. Because my feeling is that they're actually very passionate about artists and giving opportunities to artists. So that's what
Sure.
they saw an opportunity that they went and did it. So I don't think the criticality exists there for the same reasons why it didn't exist in this show. It's just because everyone, was excited
I mean,
to,
it's like,
to do
okay,
it.
as an artist or as someone who's done kind of work in contexts where you understand that you're used in one way or another, right? So there's a certain sort of deal. I think that one of the things you always want to do is not to make sure that you don't overstate your ambitions on a face value, towards your conversation partner. Mostly because it's not because you don't believe that those ambitions are valuable, but because by stating them as such, right, you change the landscape of the conversation to begin with, right? The reason why you want to stay tight in certain situations when you enter the space is because the access to the space will be granted only on some kind of particular legal basis or some particular conventional ways of exchanging that you fill the application with, right? So you made the right. You obviously made the right argument. You made the right argument to fulfill that particular role, right? Now that is what led you here, right? Once you're here, as you realize, you pretty much can do what you want, right? Now that tells you already that the whole conversation with capitalism is not about what you actually do. Capitalism would allow all kinds of things to flourish in the shade of its own big construction, as far as you don't attack the tree that holds the whole thing, right? So what does that tree is when you ask the community, right? The community flourish in the shade of a tree that they don't necessarily own, and it might not even been planted yet in that kind of way, right? Capitalism has no problem with furthering certain particular identity over others, or fostering the use of identity over others. At the moment, we know that, right? At the moment, every black and brown bodies and images around, it functions as a way for capitalism to survive. You know, I was just seeing for an ad on the tube as I was coming over today. That is like an investment. It's an investment plan for an ISA, particular form of ISA investment by JP Morgan, and a young, kind of dapper black man is the face of this investment. Never seen that ever before. It's just like a novelty that now is the capitalism language. So capitalism can use and abuse and suck in every form of identity to multiply itself. What does that tell you? That it's almost like irrelevant what identity it uses. Yeah. You know, one of the classic figures in all science fiction films, from the Terminator to the Matrix, is a shapeshifter.
Yeah.
Right, the shapeshifter is the one enters out someone else's body. At the moment, the body they're entering are black and brown. In another moment, there's someone else. It doesn't give a shit what bodies are like. It just enters it, and it does that job. So when we're talking about identity and community, I think that they're always extremely situated realities that are real only for that particular moment, here and now. Right? So that's why it's important for artists to be in a place, regardless of how that access has been granted. Because the moment that you are entering in contact with the reality, with the situated reality of a place, which has not been determined by some one guy in a room with buttons and just that kind of things. So the reason why, though, I think is interesting. The reason why you should ask, why do they want us so desperately now?
I think because they need self-reference. Capitalism is all about self-references.
But I think it's more than that. I think it's also that they haven't got a clue of what the next level will be. No one does. And they always overstate the case of the creatives, right? They always give us magic powers of visionaries because they haven't got a clue of what we do. Or they just read the press releases of other previous things that have happened in order to try to understand who we are, right? And they repeat it back to us as if we're supposed to believe it. But, I think they always coming towards artists when they haven't got a clue. And this is definitely a moment where they haven't got a clue. But it's really interesting. And it's not that we are supposed to give them the clue, because we probably haven't got a clue either. But the fact that we are sitting here, and we have in this kind of space that is somehow,
storage.
In the past, it would have been a squat, right? We know, I've been in so many conversations in squats. And even the squatters at some point tried to change and being very amicable towards property developers. And that's why I love the fact that you brought in the nomadic community garden. The nomadic community garden, I don't know if you know the work of Andrea Luca Zimmerman. She's a filmmaker known for being an activist, an artist, and she was one of the co-winner of the German Film Award, back in sort of 2018, and she did an amazing film with Cardboard Citizens, this charity that dealt with homelessness in London for a long time, and Archangel. Mm-hmm. So Archangel gave lots of money to produce this work to Andrea Luca Zimmerman and Cardboard Citizen in nomadic community gardens. Right? No, and Archangel, if you don't know who they are.
I worked for them.
Right, you worked for them? Right, did you?
Last week.
Right.
Tuesday this gone. It was just an event.
Fine. Archangel created pretty much the London landscape in the 90s, beginning with Rachel Whiteread's house in Myland, in interim spaces. Conversely, they are called the estate agents of the art world. Why? Because if you're looking for the paradigm of the middleman, the secure space for artists to come in and do something interim, they are the top. They are the ones that have defined the genre of the interim space that will become something else. But in the meantime, let artists do something, right?
How are they different from Haifa? Are they similar?
Well,
they're huge.
Okay.
they're different because they arrive in a landscape in the 90s where no one still knew what was going to happen in a London that at the time really looked like shit, and it didn't have much hope to be that better. It was like the early 90s, and there was huge amount of derelict properties. It was a downturn, it was a post-recession time, it was the pre-Blair days, It was when the art world and the YBA were really becoming the thing, and Beck's beer was the sponsor of everything that was happening to the YBA. And Beck's beer is how Archangel started to be Archangel. The first money that Archangel ever got was from Beck's beer. So private sponsorship, not the Arts Council.
Oh, the Beck's Futures.
Beck's Futures.
What was that prize?
Yeah.
Beck's
Do you remember?
Yeah.
They gave to artists to design beer labels for them, and it's almost like in return, you know. And the whole generation of the YBA existed because of Beck's beer in a way, and lots of money then went to Archangel, and then Archangel started with Rachel Whitereads, and never stopped ever since, because it became the bona fide place to go for property developers with serious intent in getting a cash into the art crowds, to give them a space to do. Look at all the projects that Archangel did, and you have the kind of gentrification map of London. You also want to look at the gallery that at the same time from the 90s onwards survived by hopping from one development to the next. Matt's Gallery, for instance, that they are now in Nine Elms, and they started in Sheetham Island, right? In exactly the same kind of spaces. So I think if you want to track down the identity of how someone survived through these kind of changes, Archangel is definitely one of them. They are almost like the paradigm for how to have serious artist engagements with kind of a derelict site, or sites that are in transition, right? Up to the Holloway Road prison, I mean, or other sites where they've done work for the last 30 years or so.
So is it a bad thing?
That's a blunt question, isn't it? It's a bad thing.
They do good stuff.
That's the thing.
There's this thing where it's like, these people are trying, like, in my head I'm like, oh, this is really great because they're putting so much art into the streets.
Sure.
But like then...
Well, look, when I was trying to do public art in the 90s, I wished Archangel would give me a call and say, Alberto, we want you. Because of course, at the time you were the enabler of the dreams that you wish you have had, and no one that gives you the chance to actually realize them. So, what is it that is this kind of the idea of? It's not bad. It's not the idea of bad good. It's just how you operate. So, what does operation do? What other things these operations in the city do? Then actually makes you feel like, oh, I am the perfect audience for Archangel. And I am the perfect recipient of the project at Archangel. I wish there would be 20 Archangels so that we could all do the things that we want to do. What they also do, which is really, really interesting, is that they politically kind of set up a certain environment in which only certain things will pass through the Archangel. A kind of a bird's eye sort of, view. Is the fact that Haifa, for instance, just like Archangel, sets up this funded regime where only some will be accepted into a certain space. And not only, you have been chosen from what I see on Haifa by the SLG Gallery director, so the South London Gallery. So, Arts Council funded bodies become the adjudicators of what else happened in that locality. So it's the same cultural view of what should happen that creates also the underbelly of a certain ecological sort of ecosystem. So it's like the same money goes down to the same level, goes down to create the same reality. Now, I'm not trying to say that we should all be born revolutionaries because we are artists. I don't think necessarily that is the way it is. But if you say that artists, perhaps one thing that they have that seems to be peculiar in a certain sense of creative imaginary, is to want to do things that are not necessarily part of the orthodoxy of what is going on around them, then you could say that taking a space which is not legitimized, or taking a space that is you're not being vetted, you're being vetted for, is the way that artists used to take spaces, alternative spaces. So the shop, the factory, the workshop, the abandoned office space used to be something that you inhabit because you want to instigate different logics of how you see art, the role of art, how do you see different things happening. Art Angel was one of them to begin with, for sure. Space Explorations was another group that were active at the same time. They were taking all kinds of strange spaces and turning them into sites for art. Now, all those things that were no innovations in the 90s, because art was not in a gallery or in a museum, they then became a cliche. Right? So we are here, in a sense, as a post version of a cliche, which is artists take over a shop. Right?
It's a kind of paradox because, like, for example, we come from another girl. We come from Italy, and the idea of like developing it's block. Like,
impossible.
It's completely different. When we think about something like that, we think just about like occupation. So go there. That's and right. Just like be outside the institution. Here we play by the side of the landlord and the institution to do something for the community.
That's right.
Of course, it's just an excuse. Because, for example, during the application, all the question was about like our artist proposal and how this activity can change us. I don't
No.
For your benefit, you mean how?
Yeah.
That was one question.
One question.
That was one question.
They think it was really important.
Did they ask about how you would engage with the community as
Yes,
well?
No. This.
But they don't give you any support to do that? Like as in, they have relationships already with the community?
Or do you need to...
No.
See, that's weird, because if they're in control of this space, essentially, for like however long Hyphen Studios have it, like why are they not? Why are they not supporting you to like engage with the community, whoever that is?
Maybe that's a decision.
No, but that could be because the community engagement might be tick box for Arts Council funding. Because the other thing is that they didn't have the funding when we did the application, they only got the funding afterwards. So it might have not been funded at all.
Well, it's a very new thing, to be honest. I mean, I think that we're all witnessing a novelty in this shift, right? Mm-hmm. So all I'm trying to say is that every time that a new middle management kind of cadre happens to arrive in an industry or in a kind of a market sort of situation, something is shifting in the way the market is working. So I think that's what we're witnessing. We're witnessing a shift. New identity emerging because there's something new on the horizon.
So I'm interested in the progression because artists, I'm from New York.
Hey.
This thing of like artists arrive and gentrification occurs, like it's interesting that it was kind of scandalous when this guy Nick talked about it out loud because I feel like it's like pretty common knowledge, but I don't know whether people are more secretive about it here or not.
Well, English are always a bit more.
People generally here,
we
they're
don't
like
talk about
planners,
Right.
investors,
We do.
developers, they pretend that
sure.
actually they really care about art for other reasons. They wouldn't normally say like, that's when you want to get artists and the money is a financial
But
opportunity.
look like more like a kind of Deliveroo, Uber Eats participation. Like an artist be part of the network, but we are kind of like the person that bring the investment. Like for example, when we arrive here, we bring all the funds. We didn't have sponsored before. When we arrive, we create the group of sponsors that now help us. Just with IFA, was like zero. So in a kind of way, it's like we were a kind of riders inside that we bring all the investors and blah blah blah. And for this reason, it's a new idea of like for the capitalists to play without the idea of like building something new, but try to take from the
How
environment.
much notice did you have between getting it and then actually doing this in the space?
It was like a couple weeks actually.
Really?
Wow.
See, that is another thing where they're
Fast
actually
turnaround,
they're
isn't it?
preventing you from being able to get funding because you don't know that it's happening
Yeah.
long enough in advance to apply for funding to support like what
Absolutely.
you're doing here. Like
Yeah.
you would, you know, the Arts Council takes 6 to 8 weeks or something.
That's right.
Like they're basically stopping you from being able to do that.
I'm interested in how, like, because you're saying this is like a new situation, or that it's changing. So how is it different because it's government? It's more government funding as opposed to Art Angel, which was more corporate funding? Is that the main difference, or?
For me, I think that it's obviously like all parties are wobbling, right? And when there's a wobble in what I'm talking about, like sort of a sense of deep uncertainty, even the reluctant parties are coming to the table, perhaps willing to concede a bit more, and the sense that it's in everyone's interest, best interest, to come to that table. So I think that the only novelty that I see, right, the roles are pretty much written. I don't think the roles that they expect everyone to play are different, right? And it's up to us to confound their expectation. But I think that rather than the roles that being different, is the fact that I have never seen Arts Council money sponsoring specifically, right, a scheme to bring together landlords and artists and make this happen. The Arts Council always believed that actually they had different priorities. There was actually just to produce art, and art with excellence, right? So they would put a lot of money into community work, for instance, in the past. Very often, sometimes also misunderstanding completely the whole layering of where they were putting the money, or where the community actually existed, right? All this idea of celebration of cities, capital of culture, city of culture, borough of culture, all those things, they would love that, because those are pageantry, almost like community self-expression and exhibition of themselves. This is who we are, right? This is what comes from within, and the artists are almost articulated. But here it seems to be really about artists in spaces doing what they want. Let them do it. Let them do it. Let's see what happens. Who knows? And the fact that the Arts Council are bankrolling essentially the middle management. That is the broker. The Arts Council pays the broker. You get the stuff for free, but everything else you had to arrange it yourself. It's just because you're Goldsmith students that you had extra power, which is why I think it worked here, right? In other situations, unless it's the university that you're in or whatever other things, if you're just a group of artists wanting to do stuff, that's a very different thing. And that's always been difficult, has always been different. I think that, in a sense, there was a perfect marriage here. It was kind of, of interests in a certain kind of way. That's what is interesting. I don't know exactly what this new management, this new broker role will bring, but certainly seems to, that slider that I was saying between amicable relationship or fuck off. And I think it's definitely on the amicable relationship at the moment. Forced amicability, right, as we were saying. There's obviously, but perhaps we also have to concede that within the kind of the evil brain-sucking sort of vampires of capitalism and the zombie ethics of everything that is going on, there is also something that I think we should concede as a kind of suspension of disbelief, almost like a kind of a strange poetic faith for a moment. That maybe something throughout the pandemic has altered some dynamics, or has kind of like dampened or suspended or coated some dynamics with something different that might produce different alliances and different ways in which spaces are, because it's not just to do with art. What I'm saying is not an artistic problem. It's certainly not an artistic problem only. The fact that we are here might signify that we are possibly given as a solution, and that's okay. But the problem truly exists. You know, the problem is it truly exists, and in a sense, we know they exist because we lived through it. Right? You lived through it as students, right? It's almost the same issue. You saw it as students, and then you see it as people here, as shoppers or citizens, dwellers, and community people. That there is a certain broader discourse that might allow the terms of. I think that what is important though is that every time artists are called in, we tend to repeat the relationships that we have between what we do and what others think of what we do. There is a certain kind of ongoing traditions of this kind of sense of having to explain, or a sense of having to invite and to produce work in a certain kind of way. Whilst I think that in general, in my experience having done this so many other times before, that is never the problem. The problem is never to be one-to-one vis-a-vis someone that is not an artist and you having to be an artist. It's always what happens next. Is how you develop that relationship. It's because I've always been kind of a more or less in one way or another through public art, social practice, social engagement, a kind of an unwilling foot soldier for someone else's bad idea of what I'm supposed to do. Right? That's almost like a condition. It's very difficult to set your own agenda unless you have an archangel behind you or a big funding that really in which you have spelled out what you want to do. But if you're on a path and you're just like in a temporary sliding situation, you're always tactical at best. There's never much more you can expect. But it's the relationship that you have with the actual people on the ground that matters for me. It's not what anyone else think that we are doing or you are doing. At the end, it's like the conversation you're having, the things that happened in Romford shopping centre, for real, right? Whatever that is.
Yeah, I guess the problem is like I'm there and I'm like, what am I doing? Why am I there? No, is anyone interested?
Yeah.
If they are, what's that even doing? Like, I don't know. It starts to feel, I don't know. And even this, like hearing you got 2 weeks notice, it's like, okay, so they think they're helping artists by, like, I don't know. I'd say, maybe it's like a bit easier because you're all students or something, but like, to think of artists being able to drop everything and make use of a space this size, I mean, it's fucking huge. Within a few weeks' notice, with like no funding being provided, it's a bit like, well, what is the point of? Yeah, what do you get out of using that space? You get like a chance to install some work and take some photos, or a bit of a bigger studio for a while. But like, then what does that lead to? You know, it's the pyramid scheme thing. It's like, well,
aren't artists just used to taking scraps though? Is it realistic to think that they would have given us like months of notice to like do something? I mean, has it been like that in the past for Art Angel or for other?
Well, I mean, if you do like an exhibition somewhere or something, then you would normally, yeah.
You're right.
I mean, Art Angel's cute. Like you would get like years notice for that.
Oh gosh.
But you'd also get like a gigantic budget.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah.
I can see that. Well, you said you're from New York, so you're trying to kind of see what is the problem here, right?
It's extraordinary that this exists at all.
Absolutely, it's totally ordinary. What is going on? It's just business as usual to an extent, right?
Yeah.
So perhaps what we're saying is that maybe there are different degrees of adaptation to a certain reality that produce a different consciousness.
Yeah.
Now, the fact that you normalize it to a certain extent, how does it? Does this, okay, you can normalize it for your own sake or your own ways. So how do you see what is happening here in that sort of normalized view? That we're just on another level in a continuing path, and the path goes from to or whatever, or is it just reasonably accepted in the now And then anything else, who knows? Sort of like, maybe that's a good adaptation level.
Like accepting.
Yeah,
the fact
total.
that
Yeah, total acceptance in a sense. This is what it is. This is the game.
I think. I mean, the questions you're raising about how different it would be if we had more time and everything like that. I mean.
But the pop-up
It's-
city, this is the idea to be
Mm.
fast,
Yeah.
change and adapt. Also because like we have to admit that in 1 week we have to deinstall and the place it will be ready for
Yeah.
another exhibition.
Yeah.
Like if I understand what is like a pop-up ideology, it's like it's something that changes as a pop-up really fast.
And this is another like
Well, that's what you were saying about influencers, right? Let's just keep
Yeah.
putting shit out.
But this
That's
is
it.
also it helps them get the HIFA get funding because they're not just giving one group of artists a space for a year. It's like, we're benefiting all of these.
No one gets too
It's
big-headed.
like a huge list.
Right.
So it's all about these different ways to get money that just perpetuate this kind of like temporariness.
I think they should use this case study and document everything you've done very, very well to go to the next level and go somewhere else and do the same thing. And
The
then
next
without
level.
IFA. Well, without IFA, or just like propose it to another space that is empty. There's so many around here. If you prove that you
Also
can
like
do it.
the bus, there is a bus.
No, I'm just saying that you have discovered
Okay.
a
So
level of
very, very
consciousness
well.
of yourself, of who you are.
You know, there's
Through
another
this
gallery
particular
nearby.
porthole
Yeah.
into this reality.
No, it's
Right?
like
The reality is now here. Soak it
The
in,
bourgeois.
understand it for what it can
bourgeois.
give you, so that
it's
you
like
can
an
actually
empty shop.
move into a different way of understanding who you are and what you can do. Right? This is what an opportunity really is, right? They offer to you as an opportunity that you should be really licking the plate and say thank you, right? So, well, maybe next time you can make that plate, or choose the food that you're taking. So, in a sense, the management kind of role of providing you with a package shouldn't make you feel that. Shouldn't give them the impression that you don't understand what this package is and what the reality that you're entering is, so that you can actually create your own package, right? Because the whole idea of that 90s kind of idea that I'm now kind of seem to describing as a sort of like glorious days where not at all. It was terrible. There was no funding whatsoever, and all you could do is just look for someone that would be your patron in one way or another, which is why Bex entered that space and dominated it for years. Because the Arts Council had no interest in that kind of stuff yet. They thought it was all a waste of money, that this is not where the excellent art was going to be produced, not in these spaces. And then they became the norm, like city racing. Right, for instance, this kind of gallery that began as a squat, historically, right? And then suddenly was adopted in another case. There's lots of documentation of where these things are actually happening. There's actually a great book on Archangel by an English kind of cultural theorist that works in France. I've got a name somewhere, but it's a really good book that kind of tracks the history of how Archangel became Archangel, if you want to know who you're working for. In that kind of way, but I think it's very important. The best things that we can expect is mostly unaware players in contests that we have no idea of. Is that we learn from the situation as much as possible, and we move to the next level with more awareness. They might fool someone else. They might not fool you anymore, or you might not feel that there's any fooling whatsoever, and actually this is perhaps a new stage of a more amicable relationship where we all internalize happily the nature of the game, and we realize that perhaps that's the best way that we can operate. Now, in my knowledge, I have never quite seen that happening unless someone goes brain dead, or there is a complete sort of atmosphere where the reality of what is actually happening is occluded or is kind of like hidden away. I think you can see that there is with the pandemic, we have seen very clearly there is no victimless game. There's no violence-less kind of game. There's no reality that has a kind of purely sort of peaceful outcome. You know, particularly in the way we are. The only things that change is us, the way we look at each other, the way we act with each other, the way we treat and talk with each other. That is ultimately the things that have appeared to me as the ultimate sort of game. Maybe then playing the game differently, remembering the history of who you are, can alter things a bit. That's my big hope. But maybe.
Because it seems like you're getting to this kind of ultimate question where, you know, is not engaging better than engaging kind of thing?
Sure.
Because that's really, I feel like that's, you know, that's the ultimate question. It's like, if you're aware of what the game is, do you choose not to engage? You know?
I think in some level you have to. I mean, as far as that many games. I mean, you remember last year, right? You guys did something in the Deptford High Street, which was very different, right? You talked to shop owners.
Mm-hmm.
You came to some arrangements. You did it all out of your own interest and ways, with a very limited budget, right? Or no budget. There you go. But you enter in specific relationships which accrued something, and your presence was in a high street.
Yes and no, but also that presence was made possible to some extent, I think, by the gentrification that happened already, because there were conversations like that happening in Deptford for 10 years maybe because of Deptford X. So
that's why that guy in 2014
said
could
that.
say something like that, as if it was like, obviously, everyone knows, right? That's been going on for long enough. Why should I just shut my mouth?
Yeah, Deptford X is made. Yeah, it's very well. It's a lot easier there to kind of use these spaces because they're used to it. I think the festival's been going about at least 20 years or something, maybe even longer.
Yeah, and that's art in perpetuity, right? APT, not the pop-up space.
I was just saying, there's another gallery like a minute away. Does anyone know it? I think they're called like Le Bourgeois. It's like an empty shop. And I've been there a few times to openings. It's very different. Like I don't know how regularly they do shows, and it has a real commercial gallery vibe, even though they're not a commercial gallery. Like you'd understand what I meant if you went there. But I spoke to them, and they told me they were essentially squatting the space. And I don't really understand if they mean squatting, but I think there's a private landlord who doesn't really give a shit, so they're not really paying. Exactly. And I don't know. It seems kind of bizarre, but I'd like to find out more. But it could be interesting to check out. Although I don't know when they do shows.
I mean, it's obvious that the timeline of the illegalizations of squatting was crucial, right? So that's changed everything. So
also the fact they say they're squatting it to me, but it looks like a commercial gallery.
Yeah.
With like
it's like backwards, right?
Yeah.
Further look like so strange. Why there is a place, Ladywell Fields, is an ex-bad in Lewisham. It look like more attractive this place, an ex-shop, than an actual really big place that can be regenerated and be something else. But I don't know why this place, like an ex-shop or a place like a building, look like more cool than an ex-bath or something like that. I'm so confused about this. So, the idea of go there and occupy, it's not anymore enough. Also because maybe you don't have like the money from the art council. You need to create something in the system to have the money from the system.
I mean, imagine the kind of hustling that is going on at the moment with all these groups, each one in a slightly different, but their interest is more or less the same. Matching community needs with empty spaces. That you can imagine this agency being everywhere. Every small-time hustler probably now in a kind of cultural or community entrepreneurship, that's what they want to do, right? They're probably coming out of Harvard already primed for this kind of landscape of business operations. And they can form an agency in no time. So who's doing the hustling for Haifa? To go out there and say to the landlords, guys, come on, we need spaces because we got this matchmaking thing. So there's no problem with finding artists because we'll put them on a list and they'll have to make an application. But certainly, so I don't know who tipped who. Who is the friend? Who's the big friend in Haifa who's got connection in the real estate? But someone has to. If you look at their members, someone has to be in the real estate market. You don't get tipped about spaces they are going without someone being in the real estate market. But those are the kind of relationships that you need. I mean, this is exactly how Art Angels has always been fed by the top real estate people in London or globally, who would rather whisper into James Lingwood's ears at some high-end party that there is a property going, and I'd like to give it to you because you're the good guys, and and you would make great use of that property. And by the time I get on site with the building, the property is already known by everyone. So can you imagine the service that you're doing as Art Angel too? That's why they started with one thing, and then they have queues of people probably that wants to offer them empty sites to do something with, so that they get the right to choose, and to choose maybe more interesting project than others, or I think it's just is who are the players, and whether you want to spend some of your time, or as a lot of your time, as Laura is just saying, in crafting the space for being an artist, rather than being the artist. We would all love just to be the artist, right? And then just actually have someone to care for all the other stuff that we don't want to do, and someone who manufactures, so we don't even have to worry about manufacturing, and then we just go around the parties and be the artist we want to be, right? That's almost like what every other worker seems to want to be. Maybe they learned it all from us, in that have those kind of ambitions of being basically living the life without doing too much effort, right? Let's face it. Like maybe we've learned this and we taught it to others, and now we have everyone else who wants to do our game, and we only have ourselves to blame maybe for that kind of bad publicity. But maybe you realize that actually your craft is exactly in fostering and worlding different things. And to world different things, you also have to come to terms with partly accepting that the nature of the things that you want to change are also not in your own powers to change. There's something that is very, I think, is very, very important. The tactical artists, I think, usually know how to maneuver themselves into a place where maybe the work of 3 years suddenly manifests itself. Yeah, it suddenly manifests itself. Why? Because you have invested generously in going to certain community meetings of a certain area because you're really interested. Right? Not because you want something from them. Because that's the worst things that you can do. When I always taught in kind of social engaged practice of things like that. And the worst thing is an artist that come and say, I want to work with a community. Says, why? Says, what is it that you know? Are you part of a community? Do you have a community? Is there anything that you do that makes you feel like there is qualifying you for being this particular community operator? Maybe not. So just you have a long way to learn, and a long way to kind of be part of something before you want to do something for it.
So that's kind of the question that I wanted to ask Laura. right? Laura or Laura?
Laura.
Laura. Because I don't know your practice. Sorry, is the mic now? I don't know your practice at all, but my question is kind of more general, like how, like putting your art in essentially community spaces, because shopping center is a community space. Like how do you navigate on whether the community needs the art or whether whatever you do, like, because it can alienate people as well. So I know I'm not expressing myself very well, but it kind of comes down to this point on, you know, you can put the art out there, but it doesn't mean that it's doing anything or it's serving any purpose. It doesn't mean that people need it.
I should say I'm not showing my own art. It's like a program of exhibitions where I've invited other artists and people, not all artists, some influencers, obviously. No, sorry, that was just the videos. There's not a program of influencers. But there's also like objects and information. So I'm going more for the museum thing than the gallery thing. If you like, as in it's, yeah, not always specifically an art exhibition in that way.
So is it easier because of that? Is it more?
I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I've only been there a week, so I don't know. The way the Arts Council work, you really have to have a programme sorted. So I've got a programme, but I'm hoping that there's room for things to kind of adapt and change a bit as it goes along. I don't know if anyone will be interested or not or whatever, but like I guess because I'm going to be there quite a lot of the time, yeah, I want to do some other things that do bring people in for the sake of like just having conversations about these ideas relating to shopping and what might become of these spaces and what might become of that shopping centre specifically, which I don't know, it'd be nice if they did survive another 95 years or whatever, but yeah, I don't know, it's hard to imagine. I mean, it's very quiet actually. It's like, it feels like a social centre, but it's not like bustling. It's not like a bustling high street or anything. So I don't know how they get the traffic through, or if people want to buy the things people are selling there, or yeah. So I don't really know. I guess I feel like I need to be there for a while to kind of figure out what the dynamic is and what I should do. But I think a lot of it is just about me being there and talking to people and, you know, not being an asshole like a lot of people in like commercial galleries are. But like, can I search your bag before you set foot in this place?
Wait, how long is your funding for?
So I'll be there probably till like the end of, like till October.
Okay.
So it's not even that long. And I'd thought, oh, maybe this could be longer term, but you have to keep applying for funding. But I'm already like, oh my God, this is not sustainable. The way that funding structures and stuff are set up, this is like highly stressful and precarious.
But that's quite a long
But that's
time.
why the hi-fi studios and people are like, do what they do, I guess.
Quite a long time.
Yeah, I don't know.
You said October.
Yeah, I mean it's
It lets you build something, right? If you're there day in, day out. With those
I mean,
people.
like, I'm also like, well, to be honest, they've given me a reduced rent apparently. So for all I know, they could boot me out if like I feel like a Botox centre wants to move in. Or something. Like if she wants to get Botox.
Give me an idea. No, but I mean, you should go actually and see it if you get a chance, because it's really.
Yeah,
I mean, I don't know if you have been in those kind of spaces. There are some more in central London as well. They're more like covered markets than malls. So the stalls are small, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah, it's kind of like an indoor market.
It's an indoor market, and there are some that are. I don't know. There's one in Wood Green that I know operates on that level.
And
they were almost
Center,
Stratford Centre. So they arrived before the mall. So they're almost like the transition from the high street, from the high street kind of market, and someone say, "Oh, let's put a roof on top of these pool stalls," right? So okay, and you get that, and so you get sucked into these spaces. It was almost like the first transition, the 70s and something like 60s and 70s. Although this place has been obviously there for much longer, and it's interesting how, as soon as the mall arrived next to them, like in Stratford is a classic case, right? Westville suddenly actually, you think that would die. He hasn't died. It's kind of found a different way of living that changed the ecology. So, in Dalston, for instance, Ridley Road Market, they're just booting them out. But they've been resisting for a long, long time. The indoor market right in Ridley Road, right? Very often those indoor markets are really where the community is. So I'll be damned if one of these might not become a kind of a way of having small, cheap indoor market which are between jumble sales and small individual stands for cheap rates community business and doing nails and stuff like that, right? Which is interesting because there's actually, as I was saying, IFA is doing the art, is covering the art specifically, but there's plenty of other people out there looking for this insertion into existing reality. They are dying or they are nearly sort of just dead, and they want to fit in something else.
There can only be so many nail bars.
Exactly. No, yeah, of course there is.
No, I was thinking about another example about big building renewal with art. Maybe the set. The set. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
They also because IFA try to work with just little shop, shop like this, but it's not a building.
Sure.
The site, like for example, I saw the one in Woolwich. It's really like.
Yeah. I was just opposite today. I walked with some students, MA Goldman students in North Woolwich. Not MA Art, just another MA. And we looked at the building and said, hey, that's where the set studios are.
I need to go to the bathroom. I'm sorry. I just drank so much water.
Woolwich
I think also.
and all that. Yeah.
It's a little bit crazy the idea that an entire abandoned building is like the idea.
Yeah.
A mall is a big building, so it's better if like a set of.
Well, look, for instance, in Greenwich, right? We're talking about places that, this is basically a high street which is haunted by its own history. It's difficult unless you have a regeneration view, and of course Team Catford is doing that, is already all here in the pipeline. I was actually curious to find if there was already an application onto this particular unit, but I couldn't find it, so, because that's the first things that I do usually. I look at whether there is an planning application lodged for that particular unit.
I think for Catford, you mean, or
I
for
think
the building?
for this particular unit.
Okay.
I'm talking about for this. Because I thought, actually, my first approach was to talk about what was going to happen next already. Right? If I knew that there was a planning application on for this.
Exists an idea.
But there isn't. There is just a generic kind of like area plan, master plan area. But that's actually already kind of in the pipeline for some time. But if you look at we're talking about Woolwich or Royal Docks or other places which are a lot less already populated, so there are plenty of other opportunities for all other things. The situation is very, very different. So you've had, for instance, V22 studio providers that had a space in Silvertown temporarily as kind of like as a box park version, and then they moved on. Or you have other studio providers artist studio providers that enter these kind of spaces temporarily and then they go. So there's so many operators out there that I think that IFA's kind of like a difficult kind of patch is that they would like to fight on one hand all the other artist-based operators who are looking for artist studios or temporary spaces for something, right? And then refit it for a longer term purpose. Or all these other community entrepreneurs' ideas that are trying to salvage the high street big landlords from going down. Because that's basically what it is. It feels almost like at the same level that in post-financial crisis, the ones to salvage were the one that caused the whole issue in the first place. And in fact, the whole empty shop, big kind of like massive new occupation was exactly in those days when the empty shop networks kind of began its operation. But Dan is still around. That actually Dan is working with Platform, this kind of like big survey kind of outfit that is trying to understand what to do with the high street after the pandemic. But it was never an agent that would broker one with the other. It would just be someone that really actually always tried to get artists kitted up to independently go and do their job, right? Not nanning them into like, just come in, do your job, get out. Come in, do your job, get out. You know, that sort of thing. I think that's the slightly patronizing role of IFA, I would say. That it just obviously is not allowing artists to develop anything. It's just like saying, come in, take, do, get out. Next. You know. Which is a little bit, I think, problematic in my view, as a way, most of all, to spend Arts Council money, which I thought it would be about building something up, building a certain kind of set of relationships. That's what they always seems to want to do. But, you know, maybe it was a one-off pitch that they did. Maybe they realized that there is something there. Who knows? You know, one thing is for sure, IFA, by being the receiver of all these applications, they've done a massive marketing research of what is going on out there. And that is data. And that's data that is not, that has a market. You know, the knowledge that they are building up with all the kind of application they get as a middle management kind of filter, it's quite something. You know, in these days where knowledge and data, the data bank, it's quite an important thing, even in culture development. I think that could put them in a position to be players in different levels. Plus the fact that all the big galleries in the space, around the area, seems to see everything that passes through. You know, that upset me, because I'm thinking, why should you please the South London Gallery director in the first place? You know, why? Why the South London Gallery director should be the one who chooses who enter in a temporary occupation of a store? Why should they be put in the place of being the adjudicator of what's good or what's not good for this particular set of occupations? That is what changes, in a sense, is quite new in my view. Because this is almost like was the bottom line ecology of art practice, that those ones up there would not really be that interested unless they are directly interested. Unless the South London Gallery say, this is our program of supporting the stores around Peckham, because we are the art gallery in Peckham, and we will pay for these things to happen in these other stores around Peckham. So they're like the South London Gallery external outreach educational.
But the reason
things.
again is because by saying that in their Arts Council application, they're more likely to get the money.
That's what I'm saying.
Because it's like you need partners, you need to numbers, artists.
That's right.
Not artist names, but numbers of artists you're going to support.
Exactly.
It's just like numbers.
Yeah. Suddenly,
names and numbers.
IFA is the channel through which so many of you pass through, and that makes Arts Council happy.
It's like an organisation born out of how to do a funding application.
Yeah.
It's like the process of the funding application is now creating these new organisations.
Yes, absolutely.
That have these stupid
They are the
abstract
middle.
roles.
Yeah.
Like it's the wrong way around.
Yeah. But I think that's
Because
the
people
ecology.
want money to be
Yeah,
paid
that's the
to do
ecology
something.
the Arts
obviously.
Council creates by doing the applications with like Grantium or kind of weird things like that. And then, on the other hand, always trying to make more money out of the money that they give, or make more things happen out of the money that they give to this organization. They've always tried to do that, to control the ecology of what happens below the large organization. By giving the money to the large organization, they will vet what happens around them. So it's a kind of a control of the arts ecology of production, which is why the only things that ever happen that are really quite of some notice, in a sense of seeing artists wanting to turn right instead of turning left, or go straight instead of going back, is not with Arts Council money in many ways. Actually, that's why I'm not trying to say there is an argument for not having public funding anymore, because that would be like entering into the kind of the counter argument of the right wing that will always say that anything you give to artists anyway is a waste of money.
No, I actually
Right.
our proposal was like,
You know,
which are your reference? And our reference
Yeah.
were like I find blah blah blah.
Yeah.
Was less like this is our project, this is us. No, it was like here our reference and that's it. And after UpNet they
that's
give
it.
to us
It's
the
all
money.
happened. Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, what I'm trying to say is that there is this really interesting ecology of art funding, art production that has come out of pandemic. It seems like actually it's tightening things up more than freeing them up. It's tightening things up because it seems like the same channel will be the ones that actually control the little money that is left, or they all going in the same direction. Or there's like, you know, remember that only a year ago, this is the government that tried to say, forget about being an artist. You're not worth your effort. Just become a nurse. You know, stop being a dancer. Stop being a ballerina.
Cyber.
Yeah, cyber, right? All that. You know,
Whatever.
that was like the kind of thinking. Oh, right, okay. So it's obvious that this love story with art and artists is always duplicitous, right? There is a duplicitous kind of strange kind of love story. But you know, the Arts Council is the one that thinks of itself as the good guy. So whatever.
Okay, we have
It's
more
interesting.
question.
What's next?
Come on, we've just been talking about it for 3 hours. What's next? Now you're dropping the big one. No, that was a question that you wanted us to answer to start with, which is why we went around it and tried to avoid it. Because what I was trying to say is that we are in the what next situation. In a sense, this is a product of what is next. As we're saying, the shift in funding,
It's
the
the post.
shift in roles, the shift in new emergent identities coming out, the shift in a certain amicable, not amicable relationship between artists and property developers or property owners. So what's next is not going to be something that someone tells you, that's for sure. If you're looking for a frontier to exploit, it's always been the one that goes and doesn't tell anyone else, right? Usually, unless you're up for a different kind of next,
Or
and then it's not the different kind of next is not going to come from the same structures that have produced this kind of situation.
How do you see artists in the new world? Do you see what place do you see other artists taking, basically?
I think that it's a question of what kind of world artist wants to bring into being. And I think artists always had pretty good idea, pretty nice people, nice ideas about the kind of world that you want to bring into being. Maybe this is the time to really believe that world can actually be brought into being, and we are at the beginning of a long journey where a lot of people have kind of started to learn about things that they were not aware of, and different ways of positioning yourself in the world seems to have emerged. A lot of sort of layers have been peeled, right? There's a certain rawness to it all that makes people maybe want to go and run away and back to the old days, as if forgetting that anything ever happened. But the shit has happened, and I think that it's exactly where we should be looking at, and not necessarily into what was before. I think that's personally, I find that the most difficult things that I encounter is how to rationalize what was before, what has been happening, and what to do now, or how to absorb the person that I was in early 2020 with the person that I've been through the last 2 years, and how the two kind of come together now. So I think that what's next is a very personal question, It's a question that goes at the heart of who you want to be as a human being, rather than a structural question. And that is why it's so difficult. Because the structures have told us that they don't know anything about how even to go ahead. Because we realized that they didn't know anything to begin with. Or they were completely wrong in what they knew, even at that point. So that's why the question is so hard, because it's a question that becomes truly existential.
How do you feel about the digitalization of art? Of expressing yourself?
Well, I mean, it's something that was already there way before the pandemic. It's nothing that is really quite unique to an extent. I guess that if we talk about NFT or things like that, or
just the whole context of everything moving definitely down that direction.
yeah. What do we mean by digitalization of art? It means the transfer of certain identities into more translatable, more kind of tradable. But I think that we've also realized that perhaps we don't need necessarily certain kind of structure to tell us what is original or what it isn't, or what is legitimate or what is not. Anyway, it's really interesting. We're talking about this kind of other person that owned that name that suddenly felt compelled to tell you that they owned the material that you were reproducing.
Yeah,
you know?
yeah. I mean, they weren't even sharing it in the
Or an
same-
idea or a concept or something.
Yeah.
Right? So
Well, I think artists try to maintain that ownership when they put something online, whereas anyone else on Instagram maybe doesn't.
Yeah.
But because you're an artist, there's this kind of.
I mean, I
where's
don't know
the
about
NFT
digitalization of art, but I think what is interesting is, look, you as a student at a particular point, right? You realized through the pandemic that actually you had some amazing resources out there without paying a penny, without having to ask anyone whether they're good or bad, whether your tutor give you the permission to see that or articulate it for you as useful. And then suddenly devalue completely your investment in the studies that you were doing, because you realize that perhaps the best thing is out there, and I just need someone to point it to me. But I don't even need that anymore now. I've got all these incredible talks that I can access to online without paying, and suddenly I have all the knowledge that I always wished I had right there, you know. And that's something that I have realized as a tutor, but I realize also as someone who's binged on all that stuff for the last 2 years, in places and institutions that I could never ever enter into or get to. And you know, what does that make me think? It makes me think that, you know, back in the 90s there was this interesting idea of the a university without building, which was basically the idea that universities are not institutions that actually have a location, but they are just path through knowledge. The knowledge is already there, and all you have to do is articulate a passage that takes someone from here to there, to there, to there. The knowledge is already existing, right? It's like to say, you know, the food is already there. Food banks rather than shops, right? Or whatever. So, what perhaps the digitalization or the entering into virtual, non-linear, non-face-to-face environment has produced is actually that we realize that a lot more transactions are possible, that we don't need to ask anyone's permission. Now, I'm not a fan of NFT or cryptocurrency or anything like that, but we know very well that the concept at its heart, that you don't need a central body to accredit the value of something, it's so appealing, right? It's so compelling. It's so sexy because you're thinking, wow, banks, hello, I'm going around you, and all this sort of. So perhaps the great idea of the moment are not really into the hands of artists, to be honest. Maybe they are just somewhere out there in different fields. But artists are always very good at articulating these worlds that are not yet quite mainstream existence, and they because we're curious about things that are not mainstream. So we become the channels through which a lot of things come to be known, even if it's not. It's art because it becomes art because an artist does something with it. So, yeah. I know you're asking me to be too much of an oracle, and I'm not that person. You don't want to put your hands in my mouth.
I'm just saying this because of what you were saying, Laura, on how you went to the place and you said that the guy is only focusing on services because of this internet phenomenon going on.
Yeah.
And that's the same thing with like spaces like this. They're creating online spaces where you essentially don't need any physical space. So in terms of the evolution of art and artists and what we're really trying to say, there's really a big shift. So when you say that as artists, when no one really knows what's going on, and now's the time to be asking the questions, it's quite interesting to...
Do you mean like people offering like online residencies and these kind of things?
No,
Or
so now you can just view art online as in...
okay, just
have you guys seen that?
Yeah,
You
the
just-
collectors can go online and just
Yeah.
order from
So
galleries,
just skip
because galleries
the-
are closed. During the
okay.
pandemic, that was like a big thing, right? Like a lot of people were stuck at home and they were ordering art online. I mean, we've been talking about physical space here and like the contention over physical space, right? But it's true, like galleries are, I think, figuring out how to adapt to the fact that,
We want that adaptation now.
do we want it?
Yeah. Or skip in the middle.
Probably partially depends what kind of art people make and whether it translates well online.
Isn't it what we're trying to put forward rather than the physicality? What we're trying to say from it.
What we're trying to what?
Say what we're trying to impact from it. What impact?
I don't like looking at art online that much. Some art, but like
Well, if you're a photographer or somebody who makes videos or something like that, like it could be.
I mean, yeah, it's fine. It's just I guess the way you encounter information online it takes I don't know.
I think that could be someone. My
Things get a
friend
bit
Ali
lost.
that is outside.
Yeah, maybe.
Okay, I'll.
Maybe?
Yeah,
Maybe. But I mean, maybe we're just ending. I don't know.
yeah.
I'm gonna have to go.